Okay, Sam, so let's switch gears now and move on to our second story for today. So, The Guardian reported that Israeli airstrikes on East Syria killed 57 regime forces and allied Iran backed fighters in the deadliest such strikes since the start of the conflict. A war monitoring group by the name of Syrian Observatory for Human Rights, which we'll get into towards the end and talk about them a little bit, reported this just yesterday on Wednesday. So, Sam, can you tell us a little bit what have you heard, what has been reported so far?
To be honest, there is not much to add. The attack was at the Deir al-Zor, I believe. I'm probably mispronouncing that. I believe Deir al-Zor town in Syria, eastern part of Syria. And nobody knows exactly how many people died, but yeah, between 40 to 50, they assume. It seems the attack killed mostly foreign fighters that worked with Syrian regime. That's been what's been reported. It hasn't been confirmed by Iran, which they say lost most people. Specifically, they talk about apparently there were people from Fatimiyun, what do you call them, legion or something. This is a sort of a foreign legion type thing of Iran. That they Fatimiyun is the group, it's mostly made up of Afghani people who are usually Shias, who either wanted to fight in Syria or for some financial reasons have agreed to fight in Syria. They are actually, I think, the largest Iranian-backed or Iranian-supported legion there. And recently, there's been a lot of media uh, campaign sort of attacking them, especially in Afghanistan. That why these people should when they come back, are they loyal to Afghanistan? Are they loyal to Iran or not? They had great relationship with the Iranian former Iranian general Qasem Soleimani. He had great relationship with this legion. So it seems that the attack hit them the hardest, and then Iranians. Although Iran hasn't really even commented on the issue for now. At the same time, but yeah, that's what's actually happened. That's the news of it itself. Then we can get to analysis, perhaps.
Yeah, so I mean, based pretty much in the first sentence of the Guardian article, they also say regime forces and allied Iran-backed fighters. So far, I mean, they're kind of reporting that it was all them. And so, just a little bit of context that I'll add to this and then throw it back to you. So, this is not the first time that, of course, Israel has attacked targets in Syria since the start of the civil war. And according to their own annual military report, they targeted 50 targets in 2020. So last year, targeted 50 targets, and the Syrian civil war now is entering its 10th year. It will have its anniversary shortly. It has so far killed just under 400,000 people, according to the only reports that we have, the only figures. This is probably a conservative estimate and essentially displaced half the population. So some of those who have been forced to leave the country, so they have become essentially refugees living either in Turkey or in Lebanon or in parts of Europe, and about the other half have been displaced internally within Syria. So they've had to flee their homes, and I wonder if there are any returns already being organized. And we're going to take the opportunity of the anniversary of the Syrian civil war to really dig into what's the status now. I mean, it's becoming a bit of a forgotten civil war, but forgotten war conflict right now. But my take is that it seems like the civil war aspect of it, I don't know what you think about this, Sam, is over pretty much, but the proxy war seems to clearly continue. I mean, if Israel has this many targets to hit in Syria right now, that means
Oh,
there are the proxy aspect of it is still going on.
sure, sure. Just some more details about the specific attack. I want to say that the Al Mayadin, which is the Iranian-funded channel for Arab speakers, they claim that the area was emptied out and there was no casualties before Israelis bombarded these regions. Apparently, 4 places were hit, and uh, yeah, I think this attack is, to be honest, the context for this attack is largely the fact that Trump and Israelis and Arab nations are trying to trying to make Iran start a war with them, and then they're gonna attack Iran basically. At the same time, they're sending a message that even if Joe Biden comes into office, Israel is independently gonna defend itself, because none of the Arab nations have any capability to, do any military strike or anything like that. So I think that's the context of this specific attack. But in terms, yeah, I mean, Syria, you can argue there is no longer Syria. Like, there are huge segments of eastern Syria controlled by Kurds and, who are American allies. There are certain small parts in the north that has been taken over by Turkey. Israel has, officially annexed the Golan Heights now, and they continuously I mean, they haven't done it much recently, but they've been continuously hitting so-called Iranian targets within Syria, and Hezbollah targets. So Syria, just like to be honest, it's quite interesting. For the last 3,000 years, Syria has been the place where East and West fight their proxy wars. So it seems that it's reverted back to its old position of being the center of the proxy war between East and Western powers, if we can describe them as Eastern and Western powers.
Yeah, I just wanted to go over something that caught my attention. So now I was reading the Guardian article. Everything that they mentioned, their reporting, is based on information that they received from the famous Syrian Observatory for Human Rights. So this is a UK-based information office founded in 2006. So I didn't know that. So it was actually founded 5 years before the Syrian civil war, but since then it has purely focused on that. I mean, according to Wikipedia. And so, I mean, I was blown away that it was still them, and it just reminded me that everything that we know from kind of the killing and the casualties from the Syrian civil war literally comes from this one organization, which is apparently pretty much like one man, one guy in London, and maybe he has like a few people helping now, and he has like a network of people in Syria that he's receiving all this information. And they have been frequently quoted, as Wikipedia says, by major news outlets since the beginning, about daily numbers of deaths from all sides in the conflict. But they were really originally described as being pro-opposition and anti-Assad. However, like for instance, the reporting here is basically on attacks that were carried out on Assad, pro-regime kind of people. So, I mean, although I think they've had that label, they have, it seems like, reported on both sides. But this is very interesting that I don't know if there are other sources that people are familiar with who are like really doing the grassroots part of the reporting before it gets written by news agencies in the West, but it seems like it's still just coming from this one organization. And for instance, in other countries, the UN might generate a lot of information that will be seen as legitimate, but the UN's role in Syria has been extremely limited, because since the Assad regime was never discredited, well, internationally they remained as, what's the word? It's escaping me right now. The recognized government, right? The legitimate government. So because legitimate government throughout the civil war. So because of that, they had a lot of control over the UN and really kept the UN to a more limited role as they had even in Yemen. So you never hear any reporting on casualties from IC coming from any of the UN agencies, but all coming from this one Syrian Observatory for Human Rights.
Yeah, to be honest, Syrian Human Observatory and many other organizations, they all seem to have a somewhat pro-opposition bias. But then again, you have places like Al Mayadin, the Iranian-backed news channel, and they have such an obvious pro-Assad bias that you are forced to basically go with them, because they seem to at least cover it up a little bit better. So, but yeah, getting real news out of Syria has been a huge issue, as it's been, as was famously the case with the gas attacks. That was, at first they said it was Syrian government, then there were clear evidence that it wasn't. People should check out the Grayzone, by the way, for more details about that. So yeah, the facts and fictions in a war miles away is just, they're gonna mix.
Yeah, that's so true. And you remember when things were going down in Libya, how much coverage and access they had there, and the beginning of the Syrian civil war, nobody, major, smaller one, nobody had any access whatsoever.